Taoiseach, as we know, over the last number of years, the rate of rent increases has been spiralling out of control. Rents have been soaring across the country. We know from the various surveys from daft.ie, particularly the most recent Q3 2016, that there have been extraordinary increases in rent inflation. 11.7% was the annual rate of rent inflation, the highest recorded since 2002. And up to 2013 and 14, Dublin was the major driver of national rental inflation. But since 2012 and 2013, other areas have caught up dramatically. And so we've had an extraordinary level of increases in Cork City last year, 14.4%, Cork County 12.5%, Limerick 13.27%, Galway 10%, Waterford City 13%, Meath 15%, Kildare 13%, Louth 15%, Wicklow 10.6%. I itemise all of those and outline them, Taoiseach, to give people a sense of the scale of rental inflation across the country and in key urban areas and the commuter belt areas over the last number of years, and hence then the need to bring this under control and to bring clarity. Now, we acknowledge that over the last number of months there have been changes. We noted for years the resistance to increase rent supplement. The confidence and supply agreement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael resulted in an increase in rent supplement, despite misgivings from Fine Gael, and also increases in housing assistance programme payments. That has happened. We also acknowledge that there's been a long struggle in relation to rent certainty and rent clarity. We know the Labour Party endeavoured to try and bring that about in the last government and failed to get any breakthrough. There seems to have been very strong resistance in Fine Gael to any idea of a rent cap or rent clarity. So that has to be acknowledged. Legislation is what brings rent clarity. Simplistic motions to play to the stage and to the gallery doesn't actually bring about any rent clarity in itself. But I just want to make those points to acknowledge that there has been change within the Fine Gael party in terms of the idea of rent clarity, and I think the pressure out there has brought that about. But the announcements made by the Minister, in our view, are far too limited in terms of scope and scale. And in the first instance, Taoiseach, given the figures I've just outlined, the geography issue is far too restrictive and too limited. Even the boundaries of the cities themselves don't take into account the suburban conurbations contiguous to the cities of Cork, Dublin, Limerick, Galway and so on. So in many ways there's an appearance of too little too late in relation to these proposals. So it's essential that the geography is broadened and takes in Galway, Limerick, Waterford and the major urban areas, and Meath, Kildare, Wicklow as well. And then on the level of 4%, given the scale of increases, Taoiseach, you know, the 4% in our view is excessive above the levels of rent that we've already witnessed and that people have suffered. So there is a need to bring that down, and there's a need to accelerate the incentives towards supply and bringing more houses into the rental market itself. So I would ask the government your position in relation to those three areas in terms of responding and getting change to the Minister's proposal.
I'm going to be severe on time today because we want to leave time for others, so that applies to all. Taoiseach.
Thank you, Lasker Corla. Thank Deputy Martin for his question. Firstly, I want to say that this is a situation that is unprecedented. It's been around for a very long time. It is the first type of intervention made by any government in the housing market here. It's targeted and it's focused, and it has particular aims set out in the Minister's comprehensive rental strategy programme. Now, I want to say to Deputy Martin that obviously there's a great deal of discussion going on with your spokesman, whom I heard this morning, and at other times, obviously, about the issues that you have raised. Minister Coveney has responded to those three issues that you have raised. You're aware that the Minister for Finance has set up a working group in respect of the taxation issue. In the budget this year, he did make his comments in respect of what he was doing in regard to landlords. And increasing the deductibility limit for them until it will get to 100%, and set out the timescale for that. In regard to the contiguous areas of the cities that were mentioned by the Minister, as Dublin and Cork, clearly this is going to be assessed on a local electoral area by the Residential Development Board. The Minister is confident that they can be extended, and would have an answer to that question by February on the assessment of the RTB. Clearly, the decision to set the cap at 4% was chosen for a number of very specific reasons, Deputy Martin. The first of those is that there is a need to ensure that there's a reasonable rate of return on investment, so that there's no spike effect at the end of the period of the designation, where a lower limit would have the effect of storing up a sudden upward correction for tenants after 3 years. Secondly, the Government previously endorsed 4% per annum on a rolling 5-year basis as a reasonable rate of return. The target portfolio set out in the ISEF Investment Strategy report published in 2015. Thirdly, the level chosen is 20% lower than the long run, over 7 decades annual rental increases in this country. Fourthly, the maximum allowed inflation in rental pressure zones will be less than half of the current rate of annual rent inflation nationally. And it's being allowed, it's below the allowed rental inflation in a number of other countries where rents are indexed, including, for example, in Germany, where rents may be increased by a maximum of 20% increase in a 3-year period. New York, where 7.5% per annum can be allowed until the maximum rent is reached. Sweden, where it can go beyond an agreed price ceiling up to a maximum of 5%. Or Switzerland, where rent increases can be raised to ensure a reasonable return, nominal rates of return approximately 6%. I'd like to think, Deputy Martin, that as this is a really important issue, and I do hope that we can manage through consultation to get it through. I stress clearly, though, 4% set by government is set for very specific reasons.
You've left it very late, by the way, in terms of the consultation, in terms of the publication of the amendments. I think they have to be in by 1 o'clock today. And so therefore it is important to have engagement and consultation. But in the last week of the Dáil, it's incredible that we are where we are in terms of proposals of this gravity and importance. But we are here, and we don't want to render tenants more vulnerable now, given that the proposals have been announced, and leave them there to be exploited over an intervening period. So we will be constructive in trying to get some resolution to this. But we're not satisfied with the capacity of the Private Rental Tenancy Board actually to deal with all of this. We believe the areas should be in the amendments, the extended areas. It's just too restricted at the moment in terms of Dublin City and Cork City. It has to be expanded beyond that, and that expansion has to be included in the amendments to the legislation in our view, and has to happen forthwith, just like Dublin City and like Cork. And in terms of the proposed increase of 4%. Again, that's a matter that has to be resolved by the Dáil. We have a view that it's excessive, and we're holding to that. We're prepared to be constructive in our engagement with the government. The third point is, crucially, Taoiseach, a lot of reliance has been placed on the Tenancy Board. There's a big issue about its capacity to monitor and ensure compliance with whatever regulations come out. Because there's a certain sense out there that there's one reality up here, but there's a completely different reality on the ground in the marketplace, where people are subjected to huge pressures to agree with increased rents. That's an issue. And therefore, the more action we take in the legislation over these 2 days, the better in terms of bringing certainty and clarity and timeliness to the interventions that are being proposed.
It might be leaders' questions, but we'll be depriving other members of time when they want to raise questions on the order of business. Taoiseach. And I would ask all to respect.
Let me just point out here, Deputy Martin, that this came into the Shannon about 6 weeks ago. It was made perfectly clear, and every spokesperson and all the parties understood that it would be in the last week of the Dáil that the matter would come before the Dáil. So it's not a case of it being very late for consultation. Consultations are going on and continue to go on with your party and with anybody else who wants to have them. Yesterday, the Minister spent the full day in committee dealing with this. Now, the RTB have been given extra resources, Deputy Martin. As pointed out, the start here is with Cork and Dublin. Clearly, there are pressures in other locations. The RTB have been given extra resources to deal with that, and they can respond and will have answers to the question by February. This is a really important matter for thousands of people now, and I do hope that this legislation will not be delayed. I've pointed out to you the reasons, very strong reasons, why government set the cap at 4%. And obviously those reasons stand up. So Minister Coveney is obviously quite willing to continue to discuss with your spokesperson in respect of the issues surrounding landlords and taxation, in respect of the geographical areas and how that can be implemented in an expedited fashion, and thirdly, in respect of the very strong reasons for striking a balance here, which is structured and directed to help both tenants and continue the supply of housing. Clearly doesn't interfere with
Adams,
new houses or
same rule applies
the
to you.
elements to provide supply.